I had known for a while that my wife, Emily, was hiding something. Her late nights, the whispered phone calls, and the sudden need for space all screamed of betrayal. I confronted her one night, my voice cold as ice, asking her if she wanted a divorce. Her response was almost too eager, a calm, almost rehearsed yes, as if she'd already planned this moment. I decided to give her what she wanted. I agreed, making it sound like I was broken and ready to move on. I told her I'd start the divorce process immediately. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she wore a mask of concern, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of relief, and I knew then that there was someone else in the picture. So I set a plan in motion. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked him to initiate the process. I moved out of the house that very day, acting like a heartbroken man trying to salvage his pride. Emily seemed almost triumphant as she watched me pack my bags, and I could feel the excitement radiating from her. She thought she had won. Little did she know, I wasn't letting her off that easily. Over the next few weeks, I maintained a cool distance, playing the part of the devastated husband who'd given up on love. But behind the scenes, I was working on a strategy, a brutal plan of revenge that would make her and her lover regret every moment of deceit. Emily had been reckless. She thought I was too broken to notice her subtle movements. She never realized that her lover, a man named Daniel, was also being watched. And that was her mistake. What she didn't know was that I hired a private investigator to follow her every move. Pictures, videos, emails, texts. I collected every piece of evidence of her infidelity. The affair was blatant, almost careless, and I knew then that this wasn't just a fling. It was a life she thought she'd live without me, and I would make sure she paid dearly for it. 2 months passed, and I played my role perfectly. I rarely spoke to Emily, letting her think I was too crushed to function properly. I watched her from a distance as she grew more confident and careless, letting her guard down. Then one day, I got the break I was waiting for. Emily sent me an email asking if I'd finalized the divorce papers. She claimed it was to make things easier for both of us. But I knew what she really meant. Her lover was getting impatient. He wanted to be with her openly, and my existence was the last obstacle. I agreed to meet her at our house that weekend to sign the papers. She looked surprised when I told her I'd be there alone, without my lawyer. I trust you, I told her softly, feigning a sad smile. I just want this to be over. She bought it. Saturday came, and I walked into the house that used to be my home. Memories of laughter, late nights, and whispered promises assaulted me, but I shook them off. This wasn't about pain anymore. This was about justice. Emily was waiting in the living room, the papers spread out on the coffee table. She looked radiant, almost glowing. I knew it wasn't because of me. I'm glad you're here, she said softly, her voice almost kind. This is best for both of us. Is it? I asked, watching her closely. She shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Where's Daniel? She froze. I saw the panic flicker in her eyes. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, my voice calm. I know about him, Emily. I know about all of it. And I know you've been waiting for me to get out of the way so you can be with him. Her face turned pale. It's not what you think. Save it. I cut her off coldly. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not here to beg for you to come back. I'm here to show you the consequences of your actions. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it on the table in front of her. She stared at it, confused, before flipping it open. The color drained from her face as she saw the pictures, the printouts of her messages, the evidence of every secret meeting she thought she'd hidden. You hired someone to follow me? She whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Yes, I said quietly. And I made sure I had enough evidence to ruin both your lives. Tears welled up in her eyes. What do you want? She asked. You'll find out soon enough, I replied, my voice as cold as ice. I could see the panic taking hold of Emily, her hands shaking as she leafed through the damning evidence I gathered. She looked up at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, don't do this, she begged. I know I made a mistake, but we can figure this out. We can talk about it. I let out a bitter laugh. Talk about what, Emily? How you betrayed me. How you planned to replace me with that coward. I shook my head. There's nothing left to talk about. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. I walked past her into the kitchen, my every movement calculated. I knew exactly what I was doing. I poured myself a glass of water, watching as she followed me with desperate eyes. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her, a cruel calmness washing over me. I'm going to take everything away from you. You took our life, our marriage, and tossed it aside for someone else. Now I'm going to show you what that feels like. Her face twisted with fear. You can't just ruin my life. You have to think about what you're doing. Oh, I've thought about it, I interrupted, my tone icy. For the past 2 months, I've thought of nothing else. I took another sip of water, savoring the taste of control. You see, Emily, I've already filed for divorce. And I've made sure that it looks like you were the one who abandoned this marriage. Financially, you're going to be left with nothing. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't. You can't do that. We built this life together. No, I said coldly. I built this life. You were just along for the ride. And now, you can watch it all crumble. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Please. I'll do anything. I'll leave Daniel. It's too late, I cut her off. You'll get nothing from me, Emily. No house, no money, nothing but the shame of what you've done. I walked past her, heading for the door. Pack your things and leave. You've got until tomorrow morning. I could hear her sobbing behind me as I stepped outside, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. I wasn't done yet. I had one more piece of justice to deliver. I drove away from the house, leaving Emily behind in a storm of tears and panic. My next stop was Daniel's place. The man who thought he could take what was mine without consequence. The private investigator had done a thorough job. I knew Daniel's address, his schedule, his habits. He lived alone in a small apartment downtown. I'd waited for the perfect moment to confront him. And tonight was that moment. I parked across the street and watched as he returned home, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. He got out of his car, carrying a bag of groceries, looking like any other ordinary man. But to me, he was the embodiment of betrayal. I got out of my car and walked over. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, and when he looked up and saw me, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. His expression changed from mild curiosity to dread as I closed the distance. Hey, man, he started, but I cut him off. You know who I am, I said coldly. We both know why I'm here. He swallowed, his grip tightening on the bag of groceries. Look, I don't want any trouble. Trouble? I let out a mirthless laugh. You've already caused plenty of trouble, Daniel. You had an affair with my wife. You destroyed my marriage. Did you think you'd just walk away unscathed? He shifted nervously, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. It wasn't like that. We didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice laced with venom. You think that justifies anything? You think that makes it okay? I took a step closer, forcing him to back up against the wall of his building. You ruined my life, Daniel. So I'm going to ruin yours. He dropped the groceries, cans rolling across the sidewalk as his hands came up in a weak gesture of defense. Please, man. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I'll stay away from her. You're already too late, I said, my voice eerily calm. I've already taken steps to make sure that you and Emily have nothing left. No job, no reputation, no future. What? His eyes widened. You can't do that. I leaned in, my face mere inches from his. Watch me. Then I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him shaking in the cold night air. I felt no remorse, no pity. He deserved every ounce of misery that was coming his way. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final move to make, a move that would ensure that both of them felt the full weight of my wrath. That night, I sat in my temporary apartment, the city lights casting long shadows against the walls. The satisfaction of confronting Daniel still lingered, but I knew I had one last move to make before I could truly close this chapter. I needed to ensure that both Emily and Daniel felt the full consequences of their betrayal. Over the past 2 months, I've been meticulously gathering evidence. Not just pictures and texts, but financial records, emails, and a pattern of behavior that proved their deceit wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated and deliberate betrayal. I was prepared to burn their world to the ground, but I wasn't going to use violence. No. I wanted them to suffer a slow, painful reckoning that couldn't be pinned on me. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Thomas. He answered on the second ring. How's everything going, James? It's time, I said. I want you to move forward with the financial freeze and the fraud investigation. I want them to be audited, and I want every single financial misstep Emily and Daniel have taken to be exposed. Thomas hesitated for a moment. You're sure about this? This will ruin her career. She ruined her own life the moment she betrayed me, I replied coldly. I'm just exposing the truth. Understood. I'll get started. You should know, this could get ugly for both of them. I'm counting on it. I hung up and poured myself a drink. Whiskey. Neat. I savored the burn, feeling it warm me from the inside out. This was the beginning of the end for them. But I still had one more move to make, one that would break them entirely. I pulled out my laptop and accessed the anonymous email account I'd created weeks ago. I composed a message to Daniel's employer, attaching photos and proof of his affair with a married woman, one of their clients. The evidence of misconduct would be enough to get him fired. I hit send, knowing that by morning, Daniel's career would be in ruins. I wasn't done. I sent a similar email to Emily's law firm, attaching a detailed list of her ethical violations and breaches of contract. She'd violated the firm's strict no-fraternization policy, and the scandal would spread like wildfire. She'd be called in for a disciplinary hearing by the end of the week, and I knew her pride and reputation would take a hit she'd never recover from. The next morning, I watched it all unfold. News traveled fast. By noon, Daniel had been terminated, escorted out of his office like a common criminal. By 3 p.m., Emily had been placed on indefinite suspension pending an investigation. I watched the chaos from a safe distance, sipping coffee as the world I once built with her crumbled before my eyes. Around 5 p.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, I listened to the message, Emily's voice frantic and broken. "James, please, you have to call me. Everything's falling apart. I know you did this. Please, just talk to me. I'm begging you." I deleted the message. I had nothing to say to her. I left my apartment later that evening and drove back to our old house, the one Emily now occupied alone. I parked a few houses down and waited, cloaked in the shadows. Around 8 p.m., Daniel pulled up in his car, looking disheveled and angry. He banged on the door, and Emily answered, her face pale and tear-streaked. I watched as they argued on the front steps, their voices rising in the night air. I couldn't hear the exact words, but it was clear they were blaming each other for everything that had happened. Daniel gestured wildly, his face twisted with rage, while Emily clutched at him, desperate and pleading. After a few minutes, he shoved her aside and stormed off, driving away into the night. Emily crumpled to the ground, sobbing into her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. She looked so broken, so lost. But I pushed that feeling aside. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. She had taken everything from me, and now I had taken everything from her. I stepped out of the shadows and walked up the path to the house. She looked up, startled, as I approached. "James, please, you have to help me," she sobbed. I crossed my arms, my expression cold and unyielding. "Why should I help you?" "Because I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "I thought I wanted something different, something exciting, but I was wrong. I never meant for it to end like this. I never meant to lose you." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't just lose me, Emily. You destroyed me. You threw away our life for a man who didn't even care enough to stay when things got tough. And now you want me to save you." She reached out, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. "Please," she begged. "I'll do anything to make it right." "You can't," I said simply. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." I turned and walked away, leaving her kneeling on the cold, hard ground. Her cries echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office and finalized the divorce. I left her with nothing. No house, no money, no support. I walked away with a clean slate, ready to start a new life free from betrayal and deceit. As I stood outside the courthouse, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from the anger, the bitterness, the pain. Emily and Daniel had reaped what they had sown, and I was finally ready to move on. It was over. In the days that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I'd taken care of Emily and Daniel, and they were left to deal with the fallout of their own choices. I'd won the war, but victory felt hollow. The house I'd once shared with Emily was now empty, a painful reminder of a life that no longer existed. I woke up every morning in my temporary apartment, surrounded by cold, unfamiliar walls. I'd get up, make coffee, and stare out the window as the sun rose over the city. My freedom was a relief, but I'd lost something essential along the way. I'd lost trust, and I wasn't sure I'd ever find it again. One evening, I got a call from Dave, my best friend. He'd been my rock through all of this, helping me stay grounded when I was ready to lose control. He'd seen me at my lowest and never once judged me for the choices I'd made. "You doing okay, man?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "I'm not sure what I'm feeling right now," I admitted. "I got what I wanted. Emily and Daniel got what they deserved. But I still feel empty." "That's because revenge doesn't heal," Dave said softly. It just fills the void for a little while. You need to find something to live for, James. Something that's not about them. He was right. I'd been living in a cycle of anger and vengeance for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to live for myself. I needed to move forward. I've been thinking about leaving this place, I said. Maybe a fresh start somewhere else. A new city, a new job. Sounds like a good plan. You've got the skills, the talent, and the resources to do whatever you want. Maybe it's time you started living again. Dave's words stuck with me. I spent the next few days considering my options. I'd worked in finance for years, but the thought of going back to my old job felt suffocating. I wanted something different. Something that made me feel alive. On a whim, I packed a bag and took a trip up north to the mountains where I'd grown up. The air was crisp and clean, and the town was peaceful in a way that made me feel like I could finally breathe again. I found a small cabin for rent and decided to stay for a while. It felt good to be away from the city, away from all the memories that haunted me. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee, when I noticed a woman struggling to unload bags of groceries from her car. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and a warmth in her expression that I hadn't seen in a long time. Without thinking, I got up and walked over. "Need a hand?" I asked. She looked up, surprised but grateful. "I'd love one. Thanks. These bags are heavier than I thought." I grabbed a few bags and carried them inside for her. The house was cozy, filled with the scent of fresh flowers and warm spices. "I'm James, by the way. I'm renting the cabin up the hill." "Nice to meet you, James." "I'm Claire," she said with a smile. "I moved here last year. Needed a fresh start." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I know the feeling. Can I offer you a cup of coffee?" she asked. "It's the least I can do for helping me out." "Sure, that'd be great." We sat on her porch, drinking coffee and talking about life. Claire had been through her own heartbreak, a divorce that had left her feeling lost and alone. But she'd found her way to this small town, and in time, she'd started to heal. "I guess we're both here for a fresh start," I said, staring out at the mountains. "Maybe that's a sign," she replied softly, "that we're meant to leave the past behind and look forward." We started spending more time together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Claire was kind, genuine, and full of life. She didn't judge me for my past, and I didn't judge her for hers. We shared stories, laughter, and long walks through the woods. The emptiness I'd felt started to fade, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. One evening, as we stood on the porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me. "James, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her?" I thought about Emily, her betrayal, her tears, her desperation. "I don't know if I can ever truly forgive her," I admitted. "But I think I can let go of the anger. I don't want it to control me anymore." She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's the first step." We stood in silence, the sky turning shades of pink and gold. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other as the sun dipped below the horizon. The next day, I went back to the city one last time. I met with my lawyer and signed the final documents, officially severing all ties with Emily. She was left with nothing but her guilt and the consequences of her actions. Before leaving the city, I drove past the house we once shared. It looked empty and cold, a shell of what it once was. I felt no anger, no hatred, only a strange sense of closure. Back in the mountains, I found Claire waiting for me. We started building something new together, a friendship, a connection, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of love. I'd been through hell and back, but I'd come out stronger. I'd let go of the pain, the anger, and the need for revenge. And in doing so, I'd found a new life, a new chance, and a new beginning. I was finally free. Claire became my anchor. The days spent in the small mountain town were filled with moments that reminded me of what it was like to be truly present in life. The weight I had carried for so long was lifting, and in its place was a sense of calm I hadn't known I could feel again. One day, Claire suggested we take a hike up to a nearby overlook. It was a trail she had discovered shortly after moving to town, and she swore it had the best view of the valley. We packed a small picnic and set out early in the morning, the sun barely cresting over the horizon as we made our way up the trail. The air was cool, the scent of pine and earth filling my lungs. Claire walked ahead, her laughter echoing as we reached the peak. She spun around, her hair catching the breeze, and for a moment, I saw pure happiness reflected in her eyes. "Look at this, James." She gestured out to the valley below, where rolling hills and forest stretched as far as the eye could see. "Isn't it beautiful?" "It is," I said softly, but my gaze was on her. We spread out a blanket and sat down, sharing sandwiches and fruit. We talked about dreams and possibilities, about leaving the scars of the past behind us and building something new. Claire shared her love for art, her dream of opening a small gallery one day, and I found myself wanting to be part of that vision. Why not do it? I asked, sipping from a thermos of coffee. Open that gallery. You've got the passion and talent. Maybe one day, she said, her eyes distant. I think I'm waiting for the right reason, the right person to share that dream with. I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. Maybe that's why we both ended up here. Maybe this is our fresh start. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw hope reflected in her eyes. I think you might be right. Life in the mountains became my sanctuary. I took a job at a local hardware store, working with my hands and helping townspeople with their projects. The simplicity of it was grounding, a stark contrast to the cutthroat world I'd left behind. Claire and I grew closer. Our days were filled with laughter, hikes, dinners at the small diner in town, and evenings spent on her porch, sharing stories beneath the stars. One night, Claire confessed, "Sometimes, I'm scared that I'll lose this, that it's too good to be true." I squeezed her hand. I know that feeling, but I think we've both been through enough to know that this is real. She smiled softly. You've healed me in ways I didn't think possible, James. You've done the same for me, I replied. You made me believe in second chances. We kissed beneath the starlit sky, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. The darkness of my past felt like a distant memory, and in its place was a future filled with possibility. A year passed, and with it came healing. I finalized my divorce, severed all ties to my old life, and focused on building something meaningful with Claire. She opened her art gallery in the heart of town, and it quickly became a place of warmth and creativity, a space that drew people together. I proposed to Claire on the overlook where we'd shared our first picnic. She said yes, tears in her eyes, and we laughed and held each other as the sun dipped below the horizon. Our wedding was small and intimate, held in the town square surrounded by friends we'd made in the community. Dave came as my best man, beaming with pride as I exchanged vows with the woman who had given me a second chance at love. We danced under strings of lights, surrounded by laughter and joy, and I knew in that moment that I'd finally found peace. Months later, I received an unexpected letter from Emily. I hadn't heard from her since the day I'd confronted her at our house. I opened it with a sense of curiosity, unsure of what I'd find. In her letter, Emily apologized for everything. She admitted her regret, her shame, and the pain she'd caused. She'd lost everything, her career, her reputation, and her relationship with Daniel. She was living alone, trying to rebuild her life, haunted by the choices she'd made. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she wrote, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, feeling a strange sense of closure. I had no anger left, no bitterness. I'd moved on, and I was happy. I'd found love and meaning in a new life, and that was enough. As I stood on the porch of the home I shared with Claire, I watched the sun setting over the mountains. I pulled her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. The past, I admitted. How far we've come. She smiled and pressed a kiss to my cheek. I'm glad you found me, James. I'm glad I found you too. As the sky darkened, I realized that I was truly free. The pain, the anger, and the need for revenge had been replaced by love, peace, and the promise of a new beginning. I'd been broken, but I'd healed, and now I was whole. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Emily, not to Daniel, but to the universe that had led me to this moment. Because sometimes, even in the darkest moments of heartbreak, life gives us a second chance, a chance to choose love over vengeance, hope over despair. And I'd finally taken that chance. And for that, I was grateful.